Okay, so this week is actually last week's video. I'm a little late doing this one. Um, I spent all of last week and then just finished today, this morning, actually entering in all of this information. Took way longer than I thought it was going to take, but I am pretty happy with how everything turned out. Um, I added in all of these item descriptions for all of the items. As it is right now, I think I have about 650, somewhere between 650 and 700 items total. That's just weapons and armor right now. I still have to add in all of the spells. I have a lot of spells kind of designed from a long time ago that I'm going to have to give another once over and probably add a couple things to. Um, but then I also need to add in consumable items. But I did get in item descriptions for every single item that I have designed so far, and then I put in some, really, they are just placeholder stats, like required stats. Every item is going to require you have a specific amount of each of the stats. There are 9 stats total. They all will be doing different things, but for each weapon, depending on what kind of weapon it is, how it works, I kind of tried my best to come up with some required stats that would at least sort of make sense. Um, so each weapon and armor will have required stats and scaling, which is it's more or less taken from Dark Souls. Um, the required stats are how much of each stat you need to actually use the weapon, and then any stats after that, depending on scaling, you get extra for weapons, extra damage, and for armor, extra armor. So, for instance, this combat axe, you need to have 8 strength and dexterity, and if you have any more than 8 strength or dexterity, you're going to get extra damage from either, depending on these scaling letter values. So C is more than a D, it goes down to E and goes all the way up to S. Additionally, weapons also have recovery and swing values. So the way I want it to work is recovery or swing speed is how fast your attack animation goes, and then recovery speed is how long it takes for you to kind of ready your weapon again so you can do another swing. So there's animation time and then how long after the animation is played that you can start your melee again. Um, then damage and special functionality if they do like minor, or if they do bleed damage or extra damage against low armor class or whatever. Pretty much any pure number values, like all of this stuff, is entirely arbitrary, and I mostly put it there just so they'd have values that I could at least test. Um, like test weapons in different situations and see kind of how they feel. Um, as I was going through again, and I copied all of this information into Unity now. As I was going through, most of these values make almost no sense, and just kind of doing so many and kind of having this arbitrary number system that I didn't really plan beforehand made it so that most of these don't really make sense when compared to one another. So I'm gonna have to do some math to kind of figure out what's gonna make more sense for these things. Um, but at the very least, I have kind of some baseline things, and I think all of the scaling stats and the stats that are required are more or less there. And then I also have whether or not the weapons require that you two-hand the weapon, or if they can be two-handed. The way I'm thinking right now, and this is again just arbitrary values, two-handing a weapon will increase the recovery and swing speed by 20%, and then just split it between the two. And then increase the damage that you deal by 40%. Probably going to change that, I don't know, those are just values that I have for right now. And then very similar thing to armor. Armor has how much armor it's giving for each item, required stats, scaling for each stat, and then each set. So there's 7 pieces to each armor set. If you're wearing all of the same set pieces, if you have all 7 of a set equipped, then you get a special set bonus. And they can range from anything to giving you an extra ability, like this one makes you go invisible if you stand still for a little while, extra damage resistance, whatever. But I've also got all of the item descriptions for these as well. Um, So that's really the bulk of what I was doing last week. This week on Monday and Tuesday, I was kind of inputting everything into Unity. So I have everything entered now, and even though a lot of that's probably going to have to change, I at least have the bulk of it in, and it's really going to just be tweaks as I go along. Every weapon now I can actually use, so that's really what I wanted to have, and I can have them all display in the inventory, which is another really important thing. Um, so I can just kind of start gathering weapons from either the ground or put enemies in and just like destroy them and then get the items and see how they end up looking when I perform the inventory screen. Um, as far as actual inventory screen goes, I have changed a little bit of things. This is just kind of a general idea of how I want the kind of character menu is what I'm calling it right now to look. So when you go into like your inventory kind of screen, um, you'll have this thing pop up at the bottom with a little system options thing over in the corner. This will probably look a little different. All the buttons will look different too, but um, then just kind of the idea going across. An idea kind of how I want things to look is having this kind of a layout. So the two resource orb things on the sides, so this will be health on the left and like your resource, depending on your class, is over on the right. And then this is the ability wheel that kind of comes down when you activate an ability, and then the little bar that I was just showing. I kind of have a general idea of how I want each one of these things to work. They're all going to be different, so they won't be really functioning the same, and they probably won't look the same either. And I want them to be pretty distinctive, so you know immediately which one you're in, and it just flows kind of as a self-contained category almost. So the way I want the inventory one to work is you click on the inventory and these little extra buttons pop up here, and they'll just have little icons of subcategories. So like this one would have a little sword, this will have a little armor, a spell, and like an item pouch thing. And then clicking on any of these would go into extra categories. I haven't really quite figured out how I want to do that because I want it to all work fairly similar. And I don't want it to get a little too complicated. The idea I'm thinking of right now is clicking on like weapons, for instance, will open like it'll replace these 4 buttons with more buttons covering all of the weapon categories, and then you can click on those to go into the weapon category and see which weapons you have. There aren't that many weapons of each type though, so I'm not sure if that's really worth it or not, and it might be better to just have them split up in the inventory screen when you click on the weapon button from these 4 right here. And then yeah, that's really what I've got going for now. This week I'd like to do a little bit more designing. I really wanted to get to this kind of like mock-up stuff last week, but it just took a lot longer to do all of the input stuff than I thought it would. But yeah, I'm gonna work on that and then try and get some of that into Unity and test out how it's looking. But yeah, that's what I've got for last week, and I will have another video on Friday. All right.